Welcome. This is Sunday edition. My name is Peter Akaba. I know you're used to seeing one of Ben Kitili on this show. Today I'm standing in, and of course today we will be taking a look at what exactly the week has had in terms of the politics, the economy, and of course what you can expect to look out for the coming week. A large panel of distinguished scholars, analysts, and indeed strategists here in studio with us today to be able to well inform you, entertain you, and of course feed into what exactly your assessment for the last week and for the coming week should be. What are we looking out for? All that on this show. As ever, we will be starting off with a look at what has been making headlines here, and well, speak into what exactly that means, and of course try to make sense of it for you in a way that will start to inform what well the politics that is going on around you means and how it does affect you as a person. Well, to start off, I want to introduce my guests. Well, with me in studio here today, I'll start from this side. Mutinda Kavembe, political analyst. Please say hello.
Hello, viewers.
Yes. And up next, of course, Hezbon Owilo. He is a political communications expert, a face that you're used to seeing here in studio. Please say hello.
Hello.
And up next, Mark Bichache, communications strategist.
Hi, Mr. Okafor, how are you?
Yes. And, well, last but by no doubt the least, Dismas Mokua, political risk analyst as well. Karibu sana.
Asante.
Well, this panel usually does speak into what exactly you can expect here. And, well, we want to start off with a look at what the headlines look like today and start off with maybe the standard. And, well, looking at what we have and the standard today, it says what Raila wants. Well, this is certainly one for the... Yes, what exactly does this headline mean? I'll read that out for you, what Raila wants, a one-on-one with the NASA chief. And this, of course, is a product of, well, an insight, an interview with journalists who are trying to speak into what exactly the stalemate in the political arena has been. And I'll start by, well, asking my panel to speak into what exactly this means. We'll start off with you here, Mr. Kavemba. Taking stock of just what this means, what would you be your takeaway from this?
Now, you know, there's what is being said in public, and
Yes.
there is what we actually think is what Raila wants.
Yes.
In public, he's been claiming that it is about electoral justice.
Yes.
And that the main reason that he's out there is because he wants a discussion to fix the electoral system of this country and probably go back into the election. That is what he's been saying.
Yes.
But many pundits are of a different opinion that probably what he wants is a scenario like we had in the 2007-2008 post-election, where parties were forced to come together and form a joint government.
So in essence, Nusumkate, I'll ask you to hold the rest of your thoughts so I can continue down the line. What do you think this means?
Well, I think by and large, the whole picture gives a clear impression
Yes.
of a man who is looking for electoral justice. Though the framing to some extent makes it appear like it's a one-man show, which is unfortunate because from where I sit, I want to believe that it's not so much about Nusumkati like so many people perceive it to be outside there, but it's so much about electoral reforms, you know, the rule of law, you know, a belief in our electoral system.
Yes.
And to a large extent, you know, the only way out to help achieve this, which probably is what many people perceive, is the fact that we'll have some sort of an arrangement which may look like Nusumkati,
Yes.
though, you know, NASA has come out clearly saying that they're not interested in sharing power.
Yes.
They just want to find an amicable solution to the stalemate, the perceived stalemate that we have right now. Yes.
Husband.
I used to think
Yes.
that Raila wanted Nusumkate, and then that window closed. Then I used to think that Raila wants electoral justice. Then I realized that justice had been served because he filed a petition to counter the August 8th election, which was successful. So there was justice that was served then. My only conclusion today is that Raila Odinga wants anarchy. He wants a country that's ungovernable. He wants to bring Jubilee to its knees. For what purpose exactly? It remains quite elusive because it's a hard thing to prove that he wants electoral justice. But it's easy to prove that what he wants is an ungovernable Kenya. To what end? That is a matter of debate.
And, well, Dismas.
Mark is making very alarming statements, and I hope at some stage he'll be able to give us the premises of his conclusion. You know, when on a national TV you claim that a national leader who commands a good portion of support from the nation wants anarchy, then he must not be left to go with murder. But when you look at that headline, Raila Odinga, it's not about Raila Odinga. And I think the political space in Kenya, it's no longer Raila Odinga under President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. We are beyond that space. Raila Odinga represents the interests and the cumulative interests and aspiration of a good part of Kenya, depending on where you sit. If you're in the NASA streets, they'll say it represents about 70% of Kenyans. If you're in the Jubilee streets, they'll say it represents under 50% of Kenya. But if you go through that story in detail and look at his body language and try to understand what his advisors are saying, he wants three things. Number one, he wants to encourage Kenyans who've been given the opportunity to count votes to count it right. Because as it is right now, our electoral managers have got a huge challenge with basic mathematics. They don't know how to count the votes. So he's looking at sanitizing the electoral system in Kenya. And then number two, he's saying that probably as a nation, and looking at the divided society that we are in, probably a presidential system doesn't work very well. Maybe we should look at a parliamentary democracy where there'll be more consensus, that every Kenyan feels that they're part and parcel of the nation. And the last thing he's looking at is inclusivity. Because, again, if you go to the NASA streets, majority of the people are saying they do not see themselves as Kenyans. They consider themselves to be, or rather, they're treated as second-rate Kenyans. They're not able to participate in public sector appointments, and they're not able to access public opportunities. So it's looking at really actualizing Article 10 of our Constitution about inclusivity, that there is equity, there is justice, that you kill nepotism, you kill tribalism. And if you want to confirm that, if you look at the Standard a few days ago, one of your journalists, Masoku, did a nice piece about the people who had applied for the position of a principal secretary. Now, if you do a rudimentary analysis of the names of the people who had applied to be principal secretaries, you will be shocked. And then another activist called Koicho Mtata, at some stage, he went to the Public Service Commission and he wanted a breakdown of the tribal arrangements in all those offices. The results were very shocking. Then a few days later, he went to the office of the Attorney General, to our law offices. He wanted now a scientific breakdown. He's not been given that information. So those are the three critical issues that, in my view, he wants to address.
Well, indeed, a powerful soundbite there from the panel. And the reason I wanted to start off with that is basically to try and set the agenda, because usually I know we start off with looking at what is in the paper, but we are at a crossroads, gentlemen, and the fact of the matter is that this country does need direction, and we now want to proceed to the political pages and see what exactly the paper holds for us today. But then the fact of the matter is that we have to speak into the situation that faces us now, even as we head towards the Jamhuri Day and the rest that we expect this week. Now, to start us off, of course, is the story that I had just talked about just a few minutes ago, what Raila wants, and basically, this is a piece from where Raila has sat down with reporters to talk about a wide range of issues, including his planned swearing in and installation as the president, his absent deputy Kalonzo, and what happens in that case, and of course his relationship with the president Uhuru Kenyatta, and of course, well, what his vision is for Kenya. Once the swearing in does happen, then what? Also on the front page of the Sunday Standard, Uhuru has said no to talks that well, had been discussed in various places and that have been mentioned here today. He, of course, has said that he intends to get down to it and to start running with his agenda for the country. What does that mean for the dialogue and inclusivity that we have had mentioned? Well, we will see. Well, also a big story. The fact that schools have been in the pages quite a bit. Of course, the politics of education in this case. Page 2 really about lecturers, about supplying schools. And the fact of the matter has been that though many people might not think about it in that way, something that we will want to talk about later on in the show. Well, education is a political hot potato here. Well, let's start off by talking about those two issues. And I want first to talk about the fact that come Tuesday, we expect that we will be, of course, having the Jamhuri Day celebrations. But on the other side of that coin, we will be seeing the planned swearing in of Raila Odinga. Well, this is important mainly because this country has been split right down the middle. Many people have different opinions about it. Many people have had their say. What does it mean for the country? I'll put that to my panel. What do you think will happen? I'll start off with you. After the swearing in, if it does take place, we have not seen a location. We don't know exactly what to happen. The anticipation has been building. What do you think this means for Kenya?
Now, what I think I know is that the NASA has been having a disruptive agenda.
Yes.
Since the boycott of the 26th election. They've been out to make sure that business does not go on as usual. And this is a continuation. That is why we had the swearing in at Kasarani, they had planned for a parallel rally. Yes. Now, again, we have the Jamhuri Day celebrations. They have again planned for a parallel activity. Mm-hmm. And the main aim of this is to show the world that this is a divided country. Yes. And it is really about how the government also reacts that will determine whether that is the picture that will be painted to the world or not. Mm-hmm. But NASA clearly wants to show the world that things are not back to normal, and they are out to ensure that actually things don't get back to normal before the issues they are raising are satisfactorily addressed. Mm-hmm. And I am not very sure about how the government will react. Yes. But having looked at the previous incidences, yes, it is likely that there might be some chaos, confrontation. Yes. And I think that is exactly what NASA wants. Mm-hmm. I think they would really feel disappointed if we do not have such a picture, because, like I've said, it is about showing the world that this is a divided country. Yes. Ordinarily, on the Jamhuri Day, we all need to be together and reflecting about our journey as a country, yes, because that is normally about internal self-governance. But going by what has been happening, yes, the NASA will most likely ensure that as we are in Kasarani, going through the Jamhuri Day celebrations, yes, then something else is going on, which is totally opposite of that, yes, and in disagreement with that. Yes. So that is what their agenda is. Yes. Yes.
Hesbon, I want to come to you, and the question is, do you think government is playing into NASA's hands? Do you think, first off, of course, whether the swearing in will go ahead? The police have been heavy-handed in the past, various other arms of government coming in to try and stifle the various moves that have been made. Do you think we will achieve what essentially should be an outcome that favors all Kenyans, or will we achieve anarchy?
I think you want to hope for an outcome that would work, for all Kenyans. Essentially, a win-win situation for Kenyans and the political class. And from the look of things, you want to imagine that things are not looking really good as far as the public is concerned. You look at the events that have taken place in the past. And the first thing you ask yourself, is NASA justified in doing what they are doing? It is not, for me, it is not a disruptive agenda, and they actually justified in exercising their rights, to civil disobedience, because they have issues that they think, yes, need to be addressed. And until they call attention to these issues through civil disobedience, no one is going to address these issues. So to the extent that they've done that, and we've had, the government come down on them in full force, you want to be afraid, that things may not really work out for the common mwananchi, the mama mboga there, the makanga who is actually dependent on the 200 shillings that they make every day. Mm-hmm. So to that extent, you'd say that, it doesn't really look good, given the stance that Jubilee has taken and the approach that, NASA has taken all along, that they're going to have the swearing in. Actually, the narrative that you get on the ground is that waliapisha, tutaapisha. And then there are also guys who are saying, wakiapisha, tutanyonga. So you hear these things and you ask yourself, it is not looking very interesting. But again, you ask a question, do I think the government is playing into NASA's hand? I think to a big extent, you want to look at a situation where the government is actually giving gravitas to what NASA is doing, a lot of it.
Yes.
Now, to a large extent, we all know that majority of these people who are talking and now advising Raila that, what, this is going to be high treason, you'll go to the gallows, are people who have never meant well for the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, under normal circumstances, these are folks who would be very happy if something bad happens to him.
Yes.
These are folks who would be very happy if he led himself to the gallows. So the mere fact that now they are coming out and telling him, you know what, you cannot swear yourself in, gives gravitas to what he wants to do. Because it tells us that there is an issue here, and if he succeeds in going ahead and swearing himself in, then the issue will become quite big and it will give him gravitas. And I think the government has done that. If it was just a question of, sweeping things under the table and allowing things to happen, then we'd assume that this is a very, mundane, everyday thing, noisemakers making noise. But it has reached a point where we are taking the NASA course very seriously, because the people who would celebrate if Raila was to send himself to the gallows are actually concerned that his intent on having himself sworn in as the people's president. And then another thing you want to ask yourself is, are the people with this swearing in? And to a large extent, you realize that majority of Kenyans, and in the last 3 weeks of travel, I've gone to Rift Valley, I've gone to my native Migori, I've gone to parts of Eastern, and what I hear are guys who are, banking their hopes and aspirations on what the Right Honorable Raila Odinga is doing.
Well, interesting perspective right then. I want to come now to Mark, and I want to read out what the headline is on page 6 of the Standard. It says, and this is a quote from Raila, and it says, the gains we made are slowly being eroded. And about, the swearing in Uhuru Kenyatta, there has been no attempt at all to reach out to me. It takes two to tango. You cannot negotiate alone. And on his push for justice and democracy, things just don't change for the better on their own. There are people who have paid the price for the freedoms that young people now enjoy. And on the Supreme Court ruling, he says the Supreme Court was blackmailed to give this, the seal of approval. These are all interesting soundbites coming from a man who has been Prime Minister here in Kenya and who continues to say that he stands with the people and that the gains that they fought so hard for in attaining devolution have now been rolled back. Do you think what is expected to happen Tuesday will help actualize what the agenda here is?
Let's honestly consider a few factors. Number one, swearing in Raila Odinga is not going to make him more popular or less popular. He's one of those figures in this country whose popularity and legacy pretty much is intact. Okay? Second issue is that there's no shortage of ways by which Raila Odinga can bring about the changes that he wants. Either by continuous picketing in Nairobi, he's shown the capacity to be able to do that. Either by pushing in parliament, by not necessarily, because he does not have the numbers, but he can create a lot of theater in parliament and draw the public attention. So the swearing in of Raila Odinga needs to be understood in that context. And the context is this, that number one, if someone is willing to walk down a path upon which you've threatened him with death, because that's the punishment for high treason, and he's still willing to go ahead, you must consider what is the message that he's passing to you. And he's telling you that I'm willing to pay the ultimate price for whatever it is that I believe in at this point. Now, we have to look at the history of Raila Odinga to prove whether it's possible for him to pay the ultimate price. Number one, this is a fellow who traveled nearly by road and by foot to Europe. when you're still young. This is someone who was in the eastern side of the Cold War for many years. This is someone who was imprisoned from 1982 onwards into the 90s. This is someone who's faced tear gas and bullet without blinking an eye. This is someone who we must consider at this space in history who's willing to pay the ultimate price. Therefore, I put it to you that this entire swearing in is not aimed at anything other than bringing the Kenyan government, and by that the Jubilee administration, to react in the manner which they're already prophesying they will. And by that they'll give Raila exactly what he wants. He wants to go to the gallows. He wants to be arrested. Why does he want this? Because it gives him the martyr status. There is a hero status and there is a martyr status. And the moment you give Raila Odinga that, then this movement will stop being about Raila Odinga. It will become an emotional push from his support base about you harassing our person. That's what the real game is here. Because as I said before, you need to understand that for Raila Odinga, whether you consider it is the electoral reform that he's pushing for, or the inclusivity that Dismas talked about, for him and a lot of the people who consider themselves his core support, is they believe that it's come down to the wire and it's about time where we push things to the next level. What he's looking for is that match that lit the tinderbox. That's what he's looking for. And as a country, we have to be genuine and face that reality. And when we face that reality, then the police and the government have to consider how they react to this. Arresting Raila Odinga will not be the solution.
Dismas, the standard, according to the standard, what Raila wants, this is on page 6. First, electoral reforms. Second, restructuring the executive. Third, judicial independence. And fourth, police reforms. Fifth, strengthening devolution. If what Mark is saying is anything to go by, Raila Odinga then wants to become a martyr. Do you think this is the case?
If Raila Odinga wanted to be arrested or spend time in prison, he will just walk across the road from his home and steal somebody's cow. And he'll be sentenced to several years in prison. Because, you know, the easiest crime in Kenya is when you're a petty thief, you steal somebody's cow or chicken, it's easy to be sentenced. Not when you engage in high levels of corruption. Now, Mark speaks about high treason. And I've taken time to go through our constitution. There's nothing called high treason or low treason. It's actually treason. And this was brought up by our colonial masters. And it's practically impossible. If you speak to Professor Githu Muigai, James Orengo, or any lawyer, or anybody who has gone through that bit, because it's a very small section of the Kenyan law, it's practically impossible to sentence a civilian for treason. You have to be in the military, you have to be in the forces for you to be thrown in because of treason and such a things. So if Raila wants to be arrested, he doesn't need to engage in treason. He can steal somebody's cow. So that idea, I think, by Makia is reducing a serious national issue to a level that is unacceptable, that will not make progress in the nation. Then let's go to what Mr. Kavemba has indicated about our disruptive agenda. And I know you host business conversations, and it is well known that the people who have taken the world to the next level are people who come with a disruptive agenda. That's how Bill Gates has taken the ICT or software industry to the next level. Whoever came up with M-Pesa in Kenya, he disrupted the status quo. And the constitution we enjoy today was occasioned by some young Turks who disrupted the status quo. So having a disruptive agenda is a very good thing, provided it's within the constitution. And nobody should mislead anybody into thinking that Raila Odinga is so naive so as to engage in something that will fall in the space of treason. Because he has indicated, and his supporters and everybody else has indicated, he doesn't want to be sworn in as the president of the Republic of Kenya. Wherever he's seated, he knows the train has left the station long time ago. The president of the Republic of Kenya is President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. By law, by constitution. The only thing that one can have a conversation around is whether or not is legitimate. Because, you know, it's a crisis in any part of the world when a president gets elected by 98% of the votes. It's a crisis. A good election is when you win by 51% and the other guy gets 49. So when you get 98% of the votes, calm down. I'm putting on my case. Now, Raila Odinga has indicated that this thing is not about him. It's not about President Kenyatta. It's about the cumulative aspirations, interest of the people who consider him as the team leader. Esbon has indicated that he's made countrywide tours. And in the NASA streets, people believe in Raila Odinga 100%.
Yes.
And one can even venture to say that majority of his supporters are irrational. But there's a good percentage who actually understand what he's talking about. Because again, if you go to Kibera right now and you ask his voters, why do they support Raila Odinga? They have no reason. They'll say he's right. Baba is always right. But there are a few who identify with what has been captured in that story.
Yes.
That we need to sanitize our electoral process. That if IBC declares Mark Bichache as a winner of a presidential election, because I know he has presidential interest, everybody believes that actually Bichache has won. But in Kenya, as we sit today, if you are declared a winner, people are not very sure. I mean, that's why the courts are flooded with petitions around the electoral circle.
Yes.
And this thing is talking about, it's not about NASA. Sanitizing the electoral process in Kenya is not about NASA. It's not about Jubilee. It's about the nation Kenya. Then another issue which he talks about is the shrinking space around our civil liberties and civil rights.
Yes.
When you talk about civil liberties, it's what happened to Dr. David Nindi.
Yes.
You're not just supposed to be arrested from nowhere. Yeah, because he claims he was abducted.
Yes.
And I'm not sure whether abducted is the right terminology because it sounds a bit heavy. He's trying to suggest that our security officers are in fact thugs, which I'm not sure whether it's the case. But we are not supposed to have a state which suppresses civil liberties and suppresses civil rights.
Yes.
And that's where Raila Odinga is saying that slowly we are degenerating into that place. So you cannot tell me that Raila is fighting for all these things because he wants to be arrested.
Yes.
I mean, the guy spent about 10 years in detention,
already,
so he has had his fair share. And it's important as a nation, we start looking at the ideas people bring forward instead of looking at the personalities. Because if whatever Raila Odinga is speaking about today, if it was President Kenyatta or the Deputy President Ruto or Moses Kuria or Kipchumba Murkomen, I suspect many of the panelists here will be breaking into Anderson's song and saying this is the best way forward for Kenya.
I'll ask you gentlemen to pause it right there because we have to go to a commercial break. But when we come back, a lot of the issues that we are discussing are merely just the symptoms of the situation we are in. If you remember, I mentioned that we would be discussing a bit of education and the politics around it. And I want you to start thinking about social indicators and how they speak into the election that we just had and what that means for the civil liberties that we are talking about. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. The discussion continues here on the Sunday edition. We now want to go to that short commercial break. To stay with us here on KTN News.